everybody? I'm Ryan from Fireside Yankees with my friend and co-host Aiden, and Hal Steinbrenner recently came out on a panel, and he had some really interesting quotes. We don't know what these exactly mean. We actually talked about this right before we hit record, which was a lot of this felt very vague. A lot of this felt very much like up to interpretation, kind of wait and see. He had talked, and I'm going to pull some of the quotes here. We're going to make some changes. Some may be more subtle than others. Possibly personnel, but not necessarily personnel. It could be practices. It could be the way we communicate. At times, talking about meetings they had in Florida. At times, it got a little dicey, but it was respectful. Talked about kind of like check your ego at the door meeting. They kind of had these, honest, I guess, conversations, the best way to put it. And he said he wanted to have their philosophies challenged. He wanted, specifically, this is a quote from him, I want you to challenge each other. And, I thought overall, this was the kind of year that makes you sit back and say, all right, what's wrong? What's broken? What needs to be fixed? And Aiden, I thought, there were a lot of interesting takeaways here. Obviously, more than just those quotes, but Aiden, how are you doing today, my friend? And kind of what was your initial read on some of the quotes you heard this past week?
Doing all right. Sunny day in the Bronx, so can't complain. But yeah, just same thing you said. Once when I read this article and I read his quotes, it was just like, what do I take away from this? Because it's really, it's a lot of fluff. Some of the quotes seem like he kind of said it to maybe appease some fans, but some of these quotes do sound productive, but then they just continue to get a little vague. So, it's just like classic Yankees media training. It's the same as the players. They get asked questions. They basically give a non-answer. They make it seem like they're giving you an answer, but in reality, you really don't take much away from it. Like, for example, when asked like what changes he considered, he said possibly personnel, but not necessarily personnel. What are we supposed to take away from that? Like, you contradicted yourself in that sentence. So, what encourages me is that out of these quotes, one of them was no stone was left unturned. He also said, I want you to challenge everything, all of our philosophies, all of our practices, but more importantly, in a respectful way, I want you to challenge each other. I want you to critique each other. Check your egos at the door. I think that's probably my favorite quote out of the whole article. That's what gives me the most hope that we are going to see some significant changes in how the Yankees operate, even if they're not getting rid of personnel. Just productive conversations is what they need to have this offseason, and criticizing each other, even if it gets a little dicey, like he said, that's productive. That's good. That's what we want, because clearly the approach that this front office, this organization took last year, it didn't work this year. So you're obviously not going to go into the next offseason and just replicate that and, rinse and repeat. You want productive conversations and challenging each other, your philosophies and everything. That's productive. Ryan, what exactly do you take from that? Check your egos at the door. That's a great quote, because I think that could be a problem in the Yankees organization. What do you take away from him saying, they need to challenge everything and all of their philosophies?
Yeah, so the big thing for me is, if you weren't gonna believe Hal's quotes before the quotes came out, you weren't gonna believe them regardless, right? Like, the way I view it is, if you were never gonna go into this trying to take away that Hal was being forthcoming, then that was like, it was never going to happen in the first place. And I don't expect somebody who doesn't believe Hal beforehand to then suddenly believe him. And I'm not saying you have to believe everything the Yankees say, but that is what they've said, right? Like, and as you mentioned, those check your egos at the door meetings, again, we will never truly know what was said. We will never truly know the extent of those meetings. But what we do know is that the Yankees are clearly looking to try to be a little different. They clearly don't feel as if the results this season was satisfactory. We can say, well, they brought Boone back and they brought Cashman back. I don't think that Brian Cashman was getting fired, right? Like, I never really felt like that was the opinion. And firing Aaron Boone doesn't really do anything. If the players like Aaron Boone and the players feel like he represents them well, he was going to stay, right? Now, they did talk kind of early in the week about, like, maybe Boone having a little more of a stern voice or holding guys a little more accountable. But as a whole, like, Do you document the failures of the Yankees in 2018 and 2019 and 2020 and 2021 and 2022 and this year because Aaron Boone didn't like bench a guy? Like, it's because the Houston Astros are better than you, or it's because the Boston Red Sox are better than you, or it's because the Tampa Bay Rays are better than you, or it's because you weren't good enough to make the playoffs, right? Like, Aaron Boone, with or without Aaron Boone, those outcomes would have remained the same. And in some cases, you know, you see with other managers across the league, like just some boneheaded decisions, right? I think some of the most notable ones, you think like the Astros don't play Yanier Diaz every day. They play Martin Maldonado, and somehow they're still very good, right? Like, their manager makes a decision that's questionable at best and objectively not a good one, and they still win. They won a World Series with Dusty Baker. Or you think of probably the most infamous one of this past postseason, John Schneider pulling Jose Barrios. Now, we don't know if that was John Schneider. We don't know if that's the front office, but my point more so is Aaron Boone has never had that type of gaffe. Aaron Boone has never been the type of guy who make a gaffe like that in a postseason situation. In most scenarios, Aaron Boone's making decisions that don't necessarily affect the game too much, right? Bring in a good reliever. Don't like hit Aaron Judge 8th, right? Like, it's the Yankees, like, it's because Aaron Judge didn't hit in the LCS last year, or because in 2021, Garrett Cole didn't pitch good enough, or in 2020 because the starting pitching wasn't deep enough, or in 2019 because the offense went silent and the starting pitching wasn't good enough, or in 2018 because we gave up 16 runs in a playoff game, right? Like, it's like, all of those things are independent of the manager. It comes down to, number one, acquiring better players, and that falls on management. Number two, and Aiden, we talked about this so much over the last 2 days. Not landing superstar caliber players. Obviously, the one that we're all thinking of right now is Bryce Harper. That's on ownership. Why did the owner of the New York Yankees not? And people could say, well, Brian Cashman said he's not a fit. If you think Brian Cashman thought Bryce Harper was bad at baseball, man, we gotta let's have an honest conversation here. The owner has to greenlight these contracts. The owner seemingly was not willing to give Bryce Harper a mega deal after just acquiring Giancarlo Stanton. Those are the type of moves that prevent you from winning a World Series. That right there, you can argue, is directly responsible for why the Yankees have not won a World Series, right? So from an ownership standpoint, from a general manager standpoint, from a player standpoint as well, because this falls on the players too, like, hey, why are we underperforming? Like, why are we playing the way we're playing? Why is it that, Nestor Cortez comes out with a quote saying that the Red Sox-Yankee rivalry isn't great, and then you proceed to get your butts kicked by the Red Sox for basically, the entire season until close to the end, right? It's like, why does that happen, right? Why is it that when you talk, right, when players come out and chirp a little bit, we usually get the brakes beaten off of us after? That's on the players too, right? Like, that type of stuff can't happen. I think the best way to look at this is if you're trying to point fingers at one specific person, you're not going to get a good answer. It falls on everybody. When a season like this happens, there is blame to be placed everywhere. I imagine some people will lose their jobs, and people that aren't necessarily faces of the organization, like, look, if they make an overhaul of their analytics staff, not even an overhaul, if they fire a couple of guys in their own analytics staff that are minor dudes, they don't even have a public listing of their directory for their entire staff. So there's some people we genuinely do not know who could lose their jobs and be replaced. It comes down to just making the right hires, obviously, but I think it's just as simple as getting good players, right? Like, we want this team to do the right things. We want this team behind the scenes to be very strong and fundamentally sound. But we can't control that, and we can't really speak to what are the right changes. But from a fan perspective and from an on-field perspective, obviously the product isn't good enough. And Aiden, I guess I want to pass you off this question. Behind the scenes, we want things to get better. I talked about how on the field I want it to get better, right? What is that thing you think they can do that reinforces your belief that there was some sort of tangible change, maybe not just over the offseason, but over the course of the season next year?
Well, Ryan, just going off of that point, you talking about Bryce Harper, just want to say, just for the record, I think if Harper was on the Yankees, they win the 2019 World Series. They don't lose in the ALCS, but I digress. Listen, we can talk, all about, this guy needs to be fired. This guy needs to be fired. I'll be honest. When I read the quote that Steinbrenner was asked, Steinbrenner was asked what changes he considered, and he said possibly personnel, but not necessarily personnel. I saw that quote, and initially I kind of thought, well, then what's going to change? I even tweeted it today. I said, I'm not sure how the Yankees baseball operations change without, any personnel changes. And Yankees Files, he replied to me, friend of the pod. He said, if you think you have good, smart people working for you, why would you get rid of them? And he's exactly right. You have to change the goals here. You have to change the ways you operate. If you think you have smart people in the building, just change the objective, and something could change. We could see a completely different team on the field next season if the Yankees change their objective. They change their values, what they value in players, what they want out of their players. Things can change. We talked about this earlier. If they start playing their players to their strengths. You talked a few episodes ago with me. You talked about Oswald Peraza's toe tap and how as soon as he stopped toe tapping, started hitting again. That's what needs to happen. We need to change our coaching philosophies, our hitting philosophies. Philosophies need to change all around. You got to start playing to players' strengths. Something that I've also thought about is just this isn't really a nuanced take. I'm sure Cashman knows he needs to get better at this, but one of the Yankees' biggest problems has been asset allocation. Yankee fans continue to complain, oh, Steinbrenner isn't spending enough money. He's not putting enough money into this team, and if we spent more money, we would win World Series. Now listen, throwing money at the problem, sometimes that really works, but when you're not allocating that money correctly, things aren't going to go well. Hal gives more than enough money for this team to be a successful team. And for the most part, this team has been a successful team. The playoffs are kind of just a crapshoot. But, the Yankees have the second highest payroll in the league. So to say that the Yankees aren't spending enough money on their team is just, that's fanciful at best. It's just about how you allocate this money. We've all gone back and we've said the Yankees were paying Josh Donaldson $26 million a year or something when they could have been paying Bryce Harper X amount of money. I mean, that's not wrong. Like, if you start spending your money better and you make better investments, then you're going to see a lot better product on the field. I mean, if we really want to get down and dirty, we can talk about was Rodon the right asset allocation this year? First year of his contract did not look great. He was out half the year and then kind of puts up a stinker when he comes back. But, that's what we need to see. What would really help our asset allocation, and Ryan, we talked about this earlier, if you start developing more minor league players into good major league players, you are getting good players at a significantly cheaper price than you are getting for a guy like, let's say, Bryce Harper, Manny Machado. You know what I mean? Like, if you have a roster with mostly young guys on rookie contracts that are producing for you, then you're going to have a good team. That's what worked with the Baby Bombers. That didn't happen this year. The Yankees have a lot of aging contracts, a lot of aging players with not so great contracts on their team. They're paying, Rodon, I don't even know his salary anymore, but you get the point. You're paying DJ a lot of money. You're paying Rodon a lot of money. You're paying Stanton a lot of money. I could keep going. All that money isn't working out for you. You have to get the return on your investment, and you have to make the right investments. So that's really what I think the Yankees really need to prioritize. You have to prioritize bringing up good young players, developing them correctly, playing to their strengths, so you're getting a good player out of a cheap investment. So that way you can go and say, oh yeah, I'm going to go and give Bryce Harper $350 million. That's exactly what the Yankees need to start doing. And yeah, that's what I got. Ryan, I'm curious. I mean, where do we go next with these quotes? Because they're so fluffy and non-answers.
Yeah, I mean, they are non-answers. Like, for as much as, again, like, I think we universally understand why these are non-answers, because that's just how sports are. Like, these guys are PR trained. You know what I mean? And when you look at the Yankees from as you mentioned, like a financial standpoint, yes, they finished with a high payroll this year. So, like, yes, there were moments where they could have done things to help them financially. Like, Bryce Harper is obviously the big one. But in terms of, like, not developing young talent, yeah, they've struggled to find guys, between 2020, really this year and 18 who can come up and impact the team. Now, the guys I took, when you mentioned that line, I took notes on guys I wanted to point out here. Volpe, Dominguez, Wells. Those are three guys that you really should feel like can pan out for you. You feel like they've broken through into the major leagues. They have found that some period or time, some success. Now, Dominguez you won't have for a while, but he's also going to be like, 21 next year? He'll come back as a 21-year-old mid-year. We thought he was going to come up in mid-2024 anyway, so it's not like it changes too much of the timeline in terms of what you thought entering the year. It just changed the timeline because he came up and looked like a superstar instantly. Wells, I think, already kind of proved he can at least hit right-handed pitching. He had a 116 WRC plus versus righties. I feel confident in his ability to hit right-handed pitching. Volpe, we know the defense is good. We know the base running is good. He has to strike out a lot less. He has to put some more balls in play. I know it's like, I'm the data guy. I'm supposed to, but I'm sorry. Data says he has to put the ball in play more, right? That's what the data says. The quality of contact's actually pretty good. It's just a matter of more contact, right? Same quality, increase the quantity, and you'll be a really good player. And then I put as the fourth guy, one of Everson Pereira or Oswald Peraza. Now, if Oswald Peraza pans out, that's pretty good for you, right? Oswald Peraza is really fast, great defender. I think he brings a lot of tools to the table. I think him panning out would be 105 WRC plus, 10 defensive runs saved, good base runner. That's a really nice player to have on your team. Now, if Everson Pereira pans out, and this is why I wanted to leave him for last, he clearly has a really high ceiling. He can hit the crap out of the ball. I want to use a different word, but I won't use that word. He can hit the you-know-what out of the baseball. He hit a ball almost 115 miles an hour in AAA. If you look at the swing decisions, they're not actually that bad. I thought the swing decisions were bad. And then I actually looked at them on the paper. They're not bad. In terms of in-zone swing rate, it's 78.2%. In terms of out-of-zone swing rate, it's 26.2%. Those are both well above average. The quality of contact, 3 to 9 expected weighted on base average on contact, that's above average. Sweet spot percentage, 39.6%. That increases your ability to hit balls in play that will have high BABIPs. High BABIPs lead to higher batting averages, and higher batting averages means getting on base more, higher OBP, all that stuff. Obviously, the thing is this whiffs, right? And I don't want to make this comparison because I know people are going to take it out of context and say I'm comparing him to this guy. But I want people to think of an outfield prospect who came up in the last decade, struggled with whiffs, made really good swing decisions, hit the ball really hard, was a really athletic outfielder, and in year 2 took that leap. I'm not saying he's going to be that guy, and I think we all know what outfielder comes to mind because he's the best player on the Yankees right now. But my point is, the Yankees have a development success story in Aaron Judge, and that's why they're even afloat. If they have a prospect success story, development success story with Everson Pereira, that's going to change the course of that's the type of stuff that, that's the type of stuff I think I look at and say, if these young players get better next year, that tells me the changes in the organization were good. Because if you're really good, your young talent is capable of giving you good production, this team's going to be a fucking wagon, dude. This team's going to be an absolute wagon. This team will be very, 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 very good next year. The question is, can they do that? The question is, do the Yankees have what it takes in terms of infrastructure to do that? I think they do. When you're the richest team in baseball, you can hire the smartest people in baseball. They have some really smart people in the minor leagues. They have some really smart people at the major league level. They have Matt Blake, obviously, who you think of as the super genius of the team. Obviously on the pitching side of the ball, you have Desi Drusel, who is a pitch design guy, really smart dude as well at the major league level. If you look at 2022, before this year rolled around, you're like, hey, Dylan Lawson's a smart guy because the team went from 19th in runs scored to 2nd. The players seem to just didn't. The players and Lawson just didn't seem to be aligned in terms of messaging and all that stuff, and that comes down to communication, which we talked about this before the podcast as well. Seems to be something that everybody on the Yankees talks about. Aaron Judge talked about communication. Garrett Cole talked about communication. Brian Cashman talked about communication. Aaron Boone, I think on the Talking Yanks podcast, mentioned a little bit about communication. And now Hal Steinbrenner has talked about communication. That seems to be the consensus issue. So overall, I think my point of emphasis would be, I think that this organization takes that next step if their young players get better, and I'm really glad you kind of dabbled on that a lot. And, again, can Brian Cashman make trades the way he was before 2022, right? When he was saying, hey, here's Hoy Jump Park, and we're getting Clay Holmes, right? Here's, we're going to trade for Anthony Rizzo, and we did trade. I know Kevin Alcantara is a pretty good prospect, but they got surplus value out of Rizzo in 2021 and 2022. going out and bringing back Nestor, right? A really savvy acquisition that got you an above average pitcher for 2 years. And I know this year was a wash, but still, those 2 years of production alone are enough to make that acquisition worth it. The Tyone trade, like it looked bad at first because Rosny Contreras looked really good, but then that 2022 year you got from Tyone wasn't bad. Like he gave you a bunch of innings and he pitched a lot, right? And then now it's like, all right, now you've traded Monty for Bader and you've made the Montage trade. And even the Gallo trade to some extent, I thought it was a really good process. The outcome wasn't great. I'm not going to harp on that too much. But, the Josh Donaldson trade, those type of trades where it's like these all didn't work out for you, and a lot of them were questionable process. We've got to stay away from the questionable process. This team was built, if you look at the 2017 Yankees, that was built on the backs of really good young players taking a year two leap. Savvy trades, you think bringing in Castro, bringing in Gregorius, bringing in Hicks, three key parts of that team. Having guys like Gardner who are veterans who could help that squad. CC, I remember, really found himself that year. The bullpen was very good. And then the young players, Judge, Gary, Severino, Montgomery, right? Like all these guys stepped up and that team took a step forward. So if you can make that 2017-esque leap again, I think you're going to be in a good spot. And I also think you have better talent than you did entering the 2017 season because you have Aaron Judge and you have Garrett Cole, right? Like that 2017 team, if they had Garrett Cole, we would have won the World Series. That's my opinion on it. But, Aiden, passing it back to you on this point, looking at this roster, looking at what they need to do in the offseason, I think the question is, do you trust this front office to get it done? I can't answer that question for everybody. I can't answer that question for you. But what do you think are some things you're going to look for in the offseason to make this roster better? And I guess I would ask you, like, what is your confidence level that they'll make those type of acquisitions?
Well, I mean, Ryan, yeah, everyone has a different take on, what should happen with this front office. Can this front office get it done? Do we have enough faith in them? Listen, I've really gone back and forth. I know I've said before, I'm just right in the middle of whether I think Cashman should be staying or not. But, I'm sitting here and thinking, and I'm just like, what does firing people really solve for next year? It could really help in the long term. But if you want the Yankees to turn it around next year, firing a bunch of people and bringing in new people I don't think that's going to work out. I think that puts you in another transitionary period for next year. That's kind of what the 2016 Yankees looked like, was maybe supposed to be what the 2017 Yankees look like. But a personnel change that doesn't, drastic personnel changes, that doesn't really solve everything. A successful offseason is a changing in coaching philosophies, a changing in coaching philosophies where you're changing your hitting philosophy as well. And, we talked about this earlier, communication. It sounds like, the Yankees have had a huge issue with communication. We haven't just heard it from one person. We've heard it from reporters and we've heard it from people directly on the team. You said, Cashman said there was a problem with communication. Steinbrenner brought up communication. Judge, who else? Cole, all that talk about, was Lawson a good communicator or not? You're going to get the best out of your players if you have good communication and you're communicating that message well. And a good Yankees team next year, a successful offseason, is making sure that you are communicating well to these young players. Because what the Yankees' success next year, I hate to tell this to people, it rides on how some of these prospects are going to pan out. The Yankees aren't going to be successful this year if they just go out, or they aren't going to be successful next year if they just go out and sign a bunch of guys. If they go sign Juan Soto, Cody Bellinger, Yamamoto, and they bring in a bunch of guys, that could just be them digging a bigger hole than they're already in. So I think that's the most important part, is just communication, and you really, really have to get the absolute best out of these players. I think maybe, that takes the analytics department, that takes the front office department, or the front office as a whole, rather. Looking at different metrics and putting a specific emphasis and value on certain metrics, because there was some talk on Foul Territory podcast, friends over there, do some work over there. There was some talk from one of their guest interviews, Ben Ruda. He was a former Yankees minor leaguer. He said the Yankees have a strong emphasis on hit effects OPS, I believe. If that's not a metric that seems to be working out for them and that seems to be, the narrative so far, then, you got to look at other metrics. So it's just about, valuing the right metrics, making sure you're communicating these metrics, these philosophies to the players correctly, and most especially to the young players. So Ryan, that's what I got. I know I kind of went in circles a little bit in there, but it's really this is a crucial offseason, and firing a bunch of people like most Yankees fans want, that's not going to solve much.
Yeah, the way I look at it is this is the team that Cashman built. This is the core that Cashman built. Another GM comes in and it's still Anthony Volpe, it's still Austin Wells, it's still Jason Dominguez, it's still Everson Pereira, it's still Oswald Peraza, Oswaldo Cabrera, Spencer Jones, Drew Thorpe, Chase Hampton, all those guys. Those are all Cashman guys, right? Like, I'm not saying that Brian Cashman is perfect or that he should be absolved for everything that occurred over the last 7 or 8 years, but everything he's done is going to influence this team for the next 5 years or 6 years, right? Like, if you fire Brian Cashman and another GM steps in and they win the World Series, will we hear the same thing that was said about the 90s Yankees, which was Brian Cashman, those were not his guys, he doesn't deserve those rings? I wonder. Like, I wonder. I'm not calling people hypocrites, I'm just throwing that out there. And I guess the last thing I really want to touch on is this team needs to be more athletic. I'm not saying baseball players aren't athletes. It would be really funny if me, the short, chubby dude sitting in a chair, started going off about how unathletic professional athletes are. But they need to be faster. They are the slowest team in baseball according to sprint speed. That needs to improve. I don't think you can win a World Series being that slow. You also can't win the World Series hitting 220. You also can't win the World Series finishing 8th in home runs and hitting 220, right? Like, if you're going to hit 220, you got to set the home run record, right? So why don't we find like a balance between that, right? Not saying balance is in like try to hit fewer home runs. No. Don't try to do that. We've seen it in the postseason. If you hit home runs, you win a lot of games, right? But you need to get on pace more, right? Like, if these home runs come with 2 men on or 1 guy on, you're going to score more runs. That's basic math, right? You want guys who have a better chance of getting on base, who run the base a little bit more, but you don't want to take away from your power. I don't want this team to lose its power identity, because I think that is what's kept them afloat. And I think that is an aspect of modern baseball. That would be like me sitting here and saying, I want my team to shoot fewer 3-pointers. I want my team to pass the ball less. It's like, or in the NFL, referring to NFL with the passing comment. No, you want your team to have a really good pass game in the NFL. You want your team to have a really good perimeter game in the NBA. But you want to be really good at other things too. Because if you're not really good at other things, that's all you are. A team that passes but gives up 30 points a game. A team that can hit threes but Giannis Antetokounmpo comes in and you've got nobody who can even put a wall around him. Like, he's dropping 50 on you. You know what I mean? And for the Yankees, what that is for them is getting on base and running the base as well. I actually think they're fine defensively. I think that if you look at them up the middle defensively, they look pretty good. If you look at them, sans left field, really. Left field's like the one spot where it's been a black hole. They're really good defensively all around. They've gotten good production in those positions. Now it's a matter of finding it offensively, and I think, again, that comes down to on-base skills, speed tools, and just maintaining their level of power, if not getting it better. If they somehow hit more home runs next year, that'd be great. And that would be awesome. I'd be all for it. I just think that this team's kind of already not like maxed out in terms of power, but I don't fear this team's ability to hit home runs. I know they're going to, if you get what I mean. So it's just a question about how many, how healthy they'll be, and if they can improve the things that they were either at the bottom of the league or towards the bottom of the league in entering 2024. So Aiden, I thought this was a really good episode just to talk about. Look, end of the day, we can't speculate too much on what's going to go on behind the scenes because we're not there to talk about it, right? We can't talk about what Hal spoke of with the coaches because we weren't there. All we can do is go by his words. If you don't believe his words, I understand. But again, like, that's kind of, I guess, irrelevant to the conversation. If you didn't believe him before, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, you weren't going to believe him now. And it's just a matter of wait, see, and hope that next year looks a lot better. Even in the free agent acquisitions, if they make the right acquisitions, we won't know until the season happens. If they play the right amount of young guys, we won't know until the season happens. If they make a good trade, we won't know until the trade pans out. Like, I thought the Gallo trade was good, and it didn't work out. I thought the Montas trade was good, and it didn't work out, right? Like, we're never going to know the answers to a lot of these questions until the end of 2024 or the end of 2025 or even the end of 2026. So it's a wait and see. Hopefully it turns out the way we want it to turn out. But if you guys enjoy our content, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you guys think about today's episode and really Hal's comments as a whole. And of course, you guys can check us out on various social media platforms. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and of course this YouTube page. The audio version of this podcast is out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And of course, you guys can check out our Twitter accounts. They're above our heads. I'm Ryan. That's Aiden. We'll be seeing you guys in the next episode of Fireside Yankees. Peace out.